For this week's SAT Bootcamp, we are going to do a review of the reading section, and we are going to focus on some results from our most recent practice test that we took in February. If you have your copy of the practice test, be sure to have that out so that you can follow along as we're going through this bootcamp. If you are a junior that took that practice test, make sure you have that copy. If you do not have your copy or you are not a junior, go ahead and select the link that is here. That'll bring you to the practice test so that you can follow along once we get to the question portion. I will post this link again so you will have it, and you should be able to access it from wherever you are accessing this video. I will also place it in the comments section or in the lower section, the information on this video on YouTube so that you may access it there as well. Again, we're going to focus on the reading portion of the test. Remember that there are 4 sections in the SAT test: the reading, the writing and language, the math with no calculator, and the math with calculator. Today we're going to focus on the reading. We're going to go over some tips, and then we are going to focus on some science-based questions and then social studies-based questions. A reminder that there are 5 passages in the reading section. Each of the passages are 700 to 750 words, and the passages always come in this order: fiction, social studies, science, then social studies, then science. So the first passage is always fiction, the second is always social studies, third science, fourth social studies, fifth science. This is important to know because if you have a strength or you feel more comfortable in a certain area, then you may want to make sure that you spend more time in that area and less time in the others so that you can get as many questions correct as possible. Within those 5 passages, one of the passages will have a paired passage, and we're going to review the questions from a social studies paired passage, so 2 passages, but they're asking questions about those 2 passages together and how they work together. We're going to focus on some of those today. If you are going through this test and you are pacing yourself in the correct way, a reminder that there's 52 questions in 65 minutes. It's the very beginning of the SAT and the first thing you come across. This means that you should invest 13 minutes per passage. You should read the passage in 3 to 4 minutes, which will allow you 50 to 60 seconds per question. The best way to do this is to go use Khan Academy, look at prior practice tests, and to practice working that quickly as you take the test. It's important to remember that if you get 50% of the questions correct on the SAT, you get an 1130. Now, many of you are striving to get beyond that 1130 score, so you may press beyond this, but if you have a question that you're really struggling with, you can move on because there are easier questions that are going to come up later in the test. So in that situation, you would want to guess and go so that you're not missing some of the easier questions that may come later. You do not get marked off for answering any questions incorrect, so you want to make sure that you answer every single question. Today, we're going to review some reading questions that we struggled with during the February practice test. There were plenty of questions that you guys did outstanding on, and overall, our average score was higher than what we've had in years past, and we were really encouraged by that. With that being said, today we're just going to focus on some of the questions that we struggled on the most so that we can improve in those questions and in those areas in the future. Again, if you have your copy and you've saved it, please pull that out and make sure you have it available right now. If not, use this link to be able to get a digital copy of the booklet so that you can follow along with these questions. So today, to start off, we're going to look at some science questions to review. Remember that passage 3 and passage 5 of the science readings, or of the reading section, are the science passages. Today we're going to focus particularly on questions 22 to 31. So right now, if you're following along with your booklet, you could pause this video and go ahead and look at questions 22 to 31, look at the passage, and preview the questions. Here are the science practice questions that we're going to review. Hopefully you've reviewed the passage. If not, you can still follow along. So it would be on page 8 of the booklet if you're following along. You'll see questions 22 to 31. These are how we did on each of these questions. So you can see the correct answer is the first line over here. So these are the correct answer. Then you can see what percentages we answered for A, B, C, and D. And then this is the percentage that we got correct. As you can see, there are many questions that we did really well on. We're going to focus on some of the questions that we struggled the most on and got lower percentages on, so that you guys can review those questions and see which areas you need to practice and how you can prepare for the test that may be coming up. So this question is asking question 22. On this question, only 41% of us got it correct. It is just asking the primary purpose of the passage. So the question I ask you is, do you always identify when you're reading a passage the main idea and the author's purpose when you are reading? One of the first things you should do when reading a passage is identify what's the main idea and why is the author writing this passage. That will lead to a lot of the questions that you are going to come across and will lead to a lot of the answers that you need. The primary purpose of this passage was to present the background of a medical breakthrough. Present the background of a medical breakthrough. The correct answer was A. 41% of us got that correct. The next question we're going to review is question 23. The author's attitude toward farming is best described as one of C, appreciation. So the correct answer here is C, appreciation. It's really important when you are answering these questions to choose the best answer choice, whatever is the best answer choice. A lot of them, as you can see here, with especially astonishment and appreciation, the two answers that we answered the most here, C and D, they are very close in what they can mean, but it's important for you to choose the best one. Again, this explains why it is so important to know the author's main idea and the author's purpose when going through these reading passages. 36% of us got that correct, while 43% answered incorrectly with astonishment. These are two-part questions. They're command of evidence questions. They are important because they pop up many times in the SAT. So they'll ask you the correct answer to one question, and then you'll have to follow it up with choosing the best answer. You can see on 25, 52% of us got this correct. What does the author suggest about transgenic studies done in the 1980s and 1990s? The correct answer is B. They were not expected to yield products ready for human use. Then you have to be able to choose which line provides the best answer to that question. In this case, it was line 35 and 36, which is answer choice C. 45% of us got those correct. This is why your teachers will often ask for you to provide the lines or be able to put the page number of where you got the evidence, especially when you're writing. It's important to be able to identify where you got the evidence and identify the supports and use those supports to support what you're saying. And that's what this is practicing. Question 29, 36% of students got this correct. Which of the following does the author suggest about the female goats mentioned in line 59? This one can be tricky because you have to use not just information in line 59, but you got to use information from around the term female goats to be able to identify what the author is suggesting about it. So although it may take you to line 59, you have to understand the whole context of the passage to answer this question. The correct answer is B, 36. It's important to not just go and jump in and look at lines, but also understand the context of the entire passage and what the author is trying to get across when answering these questions. They suggest that you preview the questions. So you would go through and preview, really quickly look at the questions before going and reading the passage, and that is so you could pick up on terms like female goats and line 59 so that you can really hone in on those as you are reading them. Again, the correct answer was B. Some of their kids were not born with the antithrombin gene, and 36% of us got that correct. Our answer choices, as you can see down here, were pretty even with 26, 21, and 17 in other cases. That was the science questions that we're going to review today. Next, we're going to review some social studies passages, and we're going to look at specifically the questions 32 to 41. Remember that the second passage, passage 2 and passage 4, are always the social studies aligned questions. This would be a great point to pause your presentation and go and preview those questions and preview the passage. The passage starts on page 10. So if you go to page 10 in that booklet, you'll be able to see the passage, preview that really quick, and then we'll go over the questions. Hopefully you've reviewed the passage. If you haven't, it's okay. You can still follow along and see which questions we struggled with the most on our practice test. And again, these are our school-wide results here. So, as you can see, this being the paired passage, the passage where you have to put together two different passages to answer the questions, it's a passage that we struggled on quite a bit, more so than the other passages. Okay. Again, over here is the percentage that got correct. The ones that are in bold are the correct answers here. So, question 32 is a question that we struggled on. In passage 1, Burke indicates that a contract between a person and society differs from the other contracts mainly in its. The correct answer is D, seriousness and permanence. Again, it's important to pick out the best answer choice when looking at these because a lot of them could be correct, but it's important to read all the answer choices and choose the best. 34% of students answered B, complexity and rigidity. It is probably because you're more familiar with those words. And because they came earlier on the answer choices, more people probably felt comfortable with those answer choices. It is important to read all the choices and to go with the best answer. Again, it's important to read opinion pieces. A lot of these are opinion pieces or argumentative pieces of writing. And it's important to pick out the author's purpose. This is asking a lot of questions about the author's purpose and what the author believes. Question 33 is another question we struggled with. As used in line 4, state most nearly refers to D, a public entity. In one of the prior boot camps, we talked about words in context. It is important to remember that the words that they give you, it is not always the most common definition that is the correct definition. This is a perfect example of that. Okay. Many students looked at the other answer choices, such as a style of living or a position in life, or their temporary condition, all of which could be a definition for state, but you have to use the context and what they're talking about to be able to pull out that the correct answer here is D. 34% of our students got that correct. On question 34, another words in context question. As used in line 22, low most nearly means, the correct answer is A, petty. Now, 41% of students answered C, inadequate. Again, this is another definition for low that we could see, and it's probably a more common definition that you're used to. But in these words in context questions, it's often the less common definition, and that's why it's important to make sure that you're looking at the context and really thinking about what the term is asking. This is one of those command of evidence questions. Okay, and especially when looking at the paired passage, it's important to be able to remember sort of the main ideas and pull those out from each of the passages so that you can compare them to each other. In this case, 38, 48% of our students got 38 correct. Which choice best describes how Burke would most likely have reacted to Payne's remarks in the final paragraph of passage 2? The correct answer is D, with disapproval, because changing conditions are insufficient justification for changing the form of government. Now, this is where it's important and always important, and why we practice it so much, to be able to identify your evidence and use your evidence to support your answers. Because there are a lot of these command of evidence questions put throughout the reading passage, and it is oftentimes what we struggle with as students, being able to identify the second part of these two-part questions. The correct answer here is D. It's identified by lines 34 and 38. So always hone in and take those questions seriously when you are asked to present evidence for your answer. Here's some overall reading tips when you're attacking that first section of the test. Remember that first 65 minutes, first 52 questions, 5 passages. Begin with what you love or what's the easiest. You are more likely to get questions correct if it is a passage that you really feel comfortable with reading. So if you love social studies passages or you love science passages, you may want to start with those. Or if you love the fiction reading, that's always going to be the first passage. It's important to make sure you answer all the questions, because you don't get deducted points for missing questions, but you may want to start with something that you're interested in, because you can get those questions correct. We struggled with the paired passage one here. It was also written in archaic language when reviewing this passage, when reviewing the social studies passage that we just did. That passage had really old language in it. And so you may want to make sure that you answer all the other ones with the more common language and go through those passages and those questions first, and then save this passage for last, because it is often the most difficult, because it's hard for us to understand. In the top part of every passage that you see, it gives the copyright date. You may want to look at that really quickly and identify that I want to read the passages that were most recently printed, so that I can follow along and understand exactly what they're saying. When you're reading, you want to read for context, to read the whole thing for context. You want to read for main idea and author's purpose, as we've said so many times. It's where a lot of those questions come from. Before you read, you should preview the question stem so that you understand line inferences, or you understand some of the questions that it's going to ask. Just preview it really quick, because it'll draw your attention then when you're reading the passage. If you're in larger paragraphs, you may want to take margin notes. You should underline key transitional words or phrases, such as except or other transition words. When going through and looking at the vocabulary, the common definition is seldom the correct definition. So with that words in context, we have 2 examples here with state and low. It's not the most common way that we use it that is always the correct answer. Just because something sounds familiar doesn't necessarily mean it's correct, and it's important to read all the answer choices before you answer, because you're looking for the best answer choice. Do not spend too long on any particular question. Remember, there may be easier questions that you want to get to and get correct so that you can drive your points up. So after 50 or 60 questions, or 50 or 60 seconds, if you don't know, circle the closest answer. If you're able to use process of elimination and get it down to 2 answer choices, select one of them and then move on. Do not read lines of text in isolation. We looked at the one example of this on female goats. The answer to that question is actually several lines before, but they refer you to line 59. That is just where the phrase was. So it's important to always read for context. As a reminder, there's 4 major ways that you can be preparing for the SAT. Number 1 is you should be putting in at least 10 hours on Khan Academy, because it's that personalized practice. Remember that 10 hours equals up to 90 to 130 points of growth when practicing on Khan Academy. Points of growth from your PSAT score. So put in 10 hours of practice. The second way, using the myresults.collegeboard.org to review your past tests and the questions you've missed. If you also have your score report answer sheet from the practice set of tests that we took in February that goes along with this presentation that I just shared with you, you can use that link and you can go through and review the questions you missed. That's a great way to prepare. You should attend the rest of the boot camps. Next week, we're going to continue with our boot camps. So continue to attend those or follow along with those online as we put those out. And if you are interested, reach out to College Drive and see what additional tutoring services they are offering. I would like you, as you leave this presentation, to think about your one aha regarding the reading section of the SAT from this presentation. What's your one major takeaway? I appreciate you taking the time to participate and to follow along today. Thank you.